What's going on, guys? Ben Brewster here, Tread Athletics. Today we're going to be answering the question, what is the absolute biggest velocity killer? Now, if you followed us for any length of time, you know that I like giving in-depth answers to questions like this. So to start, I just want to give this quote, Abraham Lincoln. You guys have probably all heard it. If I only had an hour to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 45 minutes sharpening my axe. Okay, this is the theme of my answer today. It's the theme of being able to work smarter, not harder, being able to be efficient with our time and know exactly where we need to be prioritizing our focus as a pitcher, as a position player, as an athlete in general. So what is really the biggest velocity killer? The biggest velocity killer, in my opinion, if I had to narrow it down to one thing, would be pitchers not sharpening their axe, not spending time actually knowing where they should be focusing their effort. So focusing on the wrong aspects of development, not actually understanding their true core issues, the core underlying causes for some of these surface level symptoms that they see in their mechanics, with their nutrition, with their strength training, etc. Not being efficient with their time, so again, focusing on the wrong things. For myself personally, if I could redo it just to illustrate this point, like if I could take everything I knew right now, the strategies, the mechanical knowledge, the nutritional knowledge, everything, and just travel back in time to when I was 15 years old, right? It wouldn't have taken me 7 years to figure out how to throw 95 miles an hour from 73. It would have taken me 2 years, 2.5 years to make the progress. Why? Because I would have already somehow spent all that time sharpening my axe. I would have been very focused in terms of my process, focused in terms of what I needed to do, and very, very efficient with my time versus wasting 5 years in there just trying to go through this learning process and just kind of stumbling into walls at every step and turn. So what happens when you do actually get everything right? Well, you get a story like Noah Bryant here, where he went from 165 pounds to 215 pounds in a couple of years, and from 88 to touching 100 miles an hour, getting drafted, pitching for the Royals. That type of transformation took me 7 years to do myself. It took him 2.5 years. Again, not typical, not everybody can throw 100, but just an example of we need to be able to work smarter, not harder. So to me, that's the biggest velocity killer. The value of coaching, in my opinion, is to sharpen your axe. It's to help you learn from all the mistakes that the coach has made or seen made over his entire coaching career, and expedite your learning process, expedite your trial and error process, so that you're spending every hour of every training session, every throwing session, working on the things that are actually relevant to you. Furthermore, every athlete is unique and is going to have different issues holding them back. So really, to reframe this question, it's not what is the biggest velocity killer, but what is your biggest velocity killer and or limiting factor for you? So that's what I want to explore here in this video. To do this, it takes a global approach. It takes looking at development, looking at velocity from more of a bird's eye view, more of a bird's eye perspective, versus just looking at it from maybe a purely mechanical perspective or purely a strength training perspective. So let's continue. Right, limiting factors can come in many forms. Again, it's not always a mechanical form. So this is a pie chart that I presented at Pitchapalooza last year. And essentially I've broken down development, the core development pillars into throwing mechanics, data and analytics, nutrition and recovery, strength and conditioning, psychological factors, prehab, correctives, mobility, that side of things, and then also the rehab and therapy side of things as well. So any of these one individual kind of core pillars in and of themselves could be where that velocity is being hidden. And again, it completely depends on you, on the individual, on the specific situation in determining like what is the velocity killer for that specific athlete. So, so to kind of illustrate our approach, just in one specific instance, let's take a look at Clay Holmes. Clay Holmes, obviously a relief pitcher for the Yankees, super nasty. He's a guy we've worked with now for about 1.5 years. But when he came to us, he was down in velocity. He had been 94, 97 with the Pirates the year before, never really had an arm issue in his entire career. He came to us, he was down, he was 92, 94. He had just had a flexor strain, and we had to figure out how to help this guy. Why was his velocity down? Why was he having issues? Fast forward the following year, 96, 98, a big part of the Yankees kind of playoff push, second half of the year last year when he got traded over there. But why the drop in velocity? So let's take a look at kind of where he was when he came to us, which is 2020. And then where he was the year before, significantly higher velocity. And you can see just looking at this video how much smoother and greater whip-like mechanism he's able to create here on the left versus in 2020. So just take a second, try to see like what do you notice there just off the bat that he's doing differently before versus after. So here are a couple of still frames from 2019. back inside, and then 2020 back inside. So a couple of things we noticed off the bat just during his initial evaluation is, one, you look at the position of the back foot. His heel was significantly further off the rubber at landing, and even earlier in the throw, his heel was coming off the rubber earlier before versus after. So he was keeping that heel down longer in 2020. He was landing in a more upright torso posture before, and his arm was also closer to vertical, so his arm was more on time. Fast forward to 2020, again, his heel was still down. He was in more of a forward-leaning torso posture, and his arm was a little bit later as far as the timing was concerned. So there's a lot of things that we noticed here. Really the challenge was figuring out how do these things all connect, how do the puzzle pieces connect, what might the underlying cause be. And so for him, ultimately, long story short, we realized that the underlying issue was heel connection. He was really trying to keep that back heel down as long as he could. That was something he'd been working on for 2020. And for him, that actually led to this less upright posture. He was more hunched over. His arm was a little bit later. He wasn't clearing the hips. And all of this kind of summed together. He wasn't able to get into as good of positions for him, create the same whip, create the same velocity. And this ultimately was one of the factors in his flexor strain most likely. So the fix for him was simple: understanding the cause, working smarter, not harder, realizing, hey, let's not fight this heel coming up. For him, that's how he had always thrown. It allowed him to clear the hips, it allowed him to stay upright, and it allowed him to get his arm on time. In his words, his biggest key, his biggest velocity killer, not trying to fight the heel coming up early and cueing more of an upright torso during my first move. So very simple mechanical tweak, very simple tweak in terms of what he was trying to do in his throw. And it really came down to that and a couple drills to completely get his velocity back on track. So sometimes it can be as simple as kind of questioning what you think you know, being able to track the cause, and one simple mechanical cue or tweak. So for him, go back to the pie chart, his biggest issue again was kind of this throwing and mechanical side of it. Let's look at a couple more, because again, that's not always the limiting factor. This is Kyle Wright. He started working with us in July of last year. Up until that point, so June of 2021, his average fastball velocity in his couple big league starts, 91.2. This year so far, he's averaging 94.5. So the velocity is there. What changed? For him, it actually came down to a psychological and a data side. So realizing that his game plan had gotten a lot more complex versus when he was a first rounder out of college. So rather than just simplifying everything and focusing on throwing it hard, throwing it over the plate, throwing it in the zone, it had become this very analytical approach. So a big key for him was just simplifying it, attacking the zone, getting back into this aggressive mentality and throwing his stuff hard and trusting his stuff. So you can really see this in terms of his curveball velocity from last year to this year. It's gone from 81 average to 84 average. He's throwing the crap out of the curveball and he's throwing it in the zone. The other piece, when we look at the data side, is realizing that from our data kind of analysis, his curveball was his best pitch and he was really underutilizing. He was barely throwing that pitch, even though it was his best pitch by far when actually looking at the metrics. So a big change for him was simply starting to throw that curveball more. Second half of that season, he was one of the best pitchers in AAA, got called up, and ultimately World Series champion and doing great so far this year. 15 Ks, 1 walk in 11 innings thus far. So that's an example where it's a psychological and a data component to it. That's where his velocity killer was. Nutrition and strength. This is going to be very common, especially for any of you watching who are at the high school level, maybe freshman, maybe sophomore in college, don't have a huge nutrition base, strength training base in your career. This is Antoine Kelly. He came to us 174 pounds in high school. A year and a half later, he was 205 plus pounds, and he went from 90 to 98 miles an hour as a lefty and was a second rounder to the Brewers. He's now their 14th overall prospect. For him, it was a matter of learning how to lift properly, learning how to eat. He was a hard gainer. He didn't know how to get enough calories in, didn't know how to track his body weight, track his calories, and stay on a methodical plan. For him, that was his biggest velocity killer. Addressing that unlocked his velocity potential. This is Josh James, pitcher for the Astros. Again, we didn't work with him at the time of this, but for him, he credits going from 94 to 100 miles an hour at the time with getting his sleep apnea diagnosed and addressed. So for him, it was actually a recovery limiting factor. That was where his biggest velocity killer was, is recognizing that, hey, he wasn't sleeping well. He realized this eventually, and as soon as he got that addressed and started sleeping better, he started recovering, his velocity started to tick up as a result. So for him, that was his biggest limiting factor. Matt Marsili, one of our former athletes and now one of our performance coaches. For him, it was actually mobility and power output that were his limiting factors. He'd always been a strong guy. He could squat 600 pounds. I believe he could deadlift 600 pounds as well. but his spine was stiff as a board, his chest was tight, his body was very, very tight. And all the training he had done for this entire period was this absolute strength, very slow moving strength type movements. So realizing that, hey, we needed to open up some range of motion, improve tissue quality, and improve the actual rate of force that he was able to develop. For him, he was able to go from 90-92 to 94-97 miles an hour and getting picked up as a free agent last year. So again, that's where his biggest velocity killers were. And then Rohan Honda, this is a guy who was a former Ivy League pitcher at Yale. He actually took a gap year to train with us, and for him, mechanics and mobility were his biggest limiting factors. He went from mid-80s to mid to upper 90s. He ended up being a 5th round pick to the Giants last year without even playing school ball. For him, it was opening up a ton of mobility through some of the restrictions he had in his upper half, and then also after opening up that range of motion, being able to pattern that a little bit better into his overall mechanics. So he had a super low elbow, he didn't get into good retraction, he was way uphill. He had a lot going on from a negative standpoint in his upper half that was also affecting his mechanics. So kind of a two-pronged approach for him in terms of how to ultimately address the mechanics. It wasn't just giving him mechanical drills, it was addressing the actual tissue and the mobility side of it first, so that his mechanics would actually be able to accept those patterns and allow him to get into some of these positions. So as you can see, these all take completely unique approaches to be able to unlock the velocity that was inside of them, which takes, if we go back to the pie chart, it takes being able to understand the big picture, understand the whole, and then be able to zoom in and say, hey, for you, this is where your issue is, or this is where your issue is, and that's where we're gonna build a specific plan for this guy and be able to unlock the velocity inside of him. So where do we go from here? First, main point I wanna make in the video is make sure that your plan looks at the whole picture. Second is, again, your issue might not be a mechanical one, although I know you probably clicked on this video hoping to hear hip-shoulder separation or front side flying open or one of these common issues. And sure, they're common, but that might not be where your issue actually lies, or you might think it is, but it might actually be something else causing that. Work smarter, not harder. Again, if I could go back in time, knowing what I know now, I would have been able to get to the same point in my career that I ultimately did in half or a third the time. Recognizing that time is finite, right? Recognizing that if you're a senior in high school and you aren't committed, you have a very short period of time to actually make that improvement for your career to be able to extend. If you're in college, you're a junior, you maybe only have a year left in your career if you want to play professionally to figure it out. If you're a professional guy, realize that you always have this running clock and that really the time is finite, and the better that we can actually maximize the hours that we're spending training and throwing, the better chance we have of actually getting to where we want. So that's really the point I wanted to make. Don't be searching for that one quick fix. Understand that everyone's unique, understand that your issues are going to be different than the guy next to you, and be able to come up with a plan to get there. If you guys are interested in what we offer remote and in-person training for high-level pitchers. Go ahead, email us, contact@TreadAthletics for more information, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks again for watching.